When my son got married, I thought it would be the happiest day of my life. I had waited years for that moment, the moment when I would see him standing at the altar, smiling with the woman he loved. But instead of joy, that day gave me one of the most painful memories I have ever carried in my heart. It happened so suddenly, and yet so quietly, like a whisper that breaks you inside. When I arrived at the wedding hall, I was dressed in my best clothes. My hands trembled as I held the small gift I had bought for my son and his bride. It wasn't expensive, just something meaningful, a family keepsake passed down to me from my mother. As I entered, I saw the decorated tables, the laughter, the soft music. I smiled, though my eyes were wet. I thought, this is it. My boy has grown. He has built his own life. But before I could take a seat, my daughter-in-law's cousin walked over. She looked at me politely, but her words cut like a knife. "Auntie," she said softly, "could you please sit outside for now? The seats inside are for close family." For a moment, I could not breathe. Close family? I was his mother, the one who carried him, raised him, fed him, prayed for him. And yet here I was, being asked to step outside. I wanted to cry. My chest tightened, but I forced a smile. "Of course," I whispered, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. So I walked outside, alone. I sat on a small chair in the hallway, listening to the music and laughter that floated from inside. People passed me by, barely noticing me. Some gave me sympathetic glances, but most didn't say a word. Minutes turned into an hour. My legs felt numb, but my heart was breaking. I thought to myself, maybe this is what life is. Maybe a mother's love is meant to be taken for granted. But then, something unexpected happened. An hour later, I heard hurried footsteps. The doors opened, and my daughter-in-law herself came rushing out. Her eyes were wide with guilt, her hands trembling. She knelt beside me and whispered, "Please, Mama, please come inside. We need you." And in that moment, everything changed.
I have only one son. His name is Daniel. From the day he was born, my life revolved around him. I was a young mother, unsure of myself, but the moment I held him in my arms, I felt a kind of love I had never known before. His tiny fingers wrapped around mine, and in that moment, I made a promise. I would give him everything I had, no matter the cost. His father, my husband, was a kind man, though quiet. He worked long hours to provide for us, but the bond between me and Daniel was something different. It was not just mother and child. It was as if he was my reason to keep going when days felt heavy. I still remember his first steps. He wobbled across the living room floor, laughing, and when he fell, he looked up at me not with fear, but with trust. And I clapped, and he stood again. That was my son, always ready to try again, always ready to rise. As the years passed, Daniel grew into a gentle boy. He was the kind of child who would notice when I was tired and bring me a glass of water. He never liked to see me cry. Sometimes, late at night, when he found me sitting by the window, missing my parents who had passed away, he would sit beside me and hold my hand. "I'm here, Mama," he would whisper. Just 3 words, but they meant the world. Our home was small, but we filled it with laughter. Birthdays were simple, a cake, some candles, a few friends. But Daniel always looked at me with eyes that sparkled, as if I had given him the world. He would hug me tightly and say, "You're the best, Mama." And in those moments, I felt rich, no matter how little money we had. School years went by quickly. Daniel was bright, though not the top of his class. But what made me proud was not his grades, it was his kindness. Teachers often told me, "Your son has such a good heart. He helps others without being asked." And I would smile, my chest swelling with pride. When he was a teenager, things became harder. He had his own opinions, his own friends, and sometimes he would argue with me. But even then, his love never faded. On my birthday, he saved his pocket money to buy me a small necklace. It was nothing fancy, just a silver chain with a tiny heart. But when he placed it around my neck, I cried. I wore it every day, even when the chain grew old and thin. Then came the years of change. University, first job, and suddenly he was not my little boy anymore. He was a man, tall, strong, with dreams of his own. I watched from a distance as he built his life, and though it hurt to let go, I knew this was what every mother prepares for, to give the world a man who can stand on his own feet. It was during these years that he met her, the woman who would one day become his wife. Her name was Julia. The first time he brought her home, I remember my heart beating fast. Would she like me? Would she respect me? Would she love my son the way I had loved him all these years? She walked in with a shy smile, carrying a small cake. "For you, Auntie," she said. Her voice was soft, her eyes gentle, and I thought, maybe this will work. I welcomed her warmly. We sat at the table, drank tea, and spoke of simple things. She laughed at Daniel's jokes, and I saw in her eyes that she truly cared for him. That gave me comfort because more than anything, I wanted my son to be loved. In the months that followed, Julia visited often. Sometimes she helped me cook. Sometimes we just talked. She told me about her parents, her childhood, her dreams. I listened with patience, hoping to build a bond. Still, a quiet fear lingered in my heart. The fear every mother knows, but rarely says aloud, that once a son marries, his love for his mother will change, that the woman he chooses will become the center of his world, and the mother will quietly step back into the shadows. I tried not to think of it. I tried to be strong. The day Daniel told me he was going to propose, I smiled. But when he left the room, I cried, not out of sadness, but out of the ache of knowing life was moving forward and nothing stays the same forever. The wedding preparations were full of excitement. I was not part of every decision, but I tried to help where I could. I bought new clothes, planned a small gift, and prayed that the day would be beautiful. Friends and neighbors asked me, "Are you ready to be a mother-in-law?" And I laughed softly. Ready? Who is ever ready to let their child go? The night before the wedding, I could not sleep. I sat by the window, looking at the stars. I whispered a prayer to my own mother in heaven. Please, give me strength. Help me be happy for him even if my heart feels heavy. I thought about the years, the sacrifices, the nights I stayed awake when he was sick, the mornings I walked him to school, the meals I skipped so he could eat more. And now, all of it led to this day, his new beginning. But I never imagined that on the very morning of his wedding, I would be asked to step aside, that my presence, my love, my place as his mother would be questioned. And yet, that is exactly what happened.
The days after the wedding were filled with mixed emotions. On the surface, everything seemed perfect. My son was happy, Julia was adjusting to her new role, and the house echoed with the laughter of young love. But beneath it all, a quiet distance began to form, a distance that no one spoke of, yet I felt it every day. At first, it was small things. Daniel used to call me every morning before leaving for work. A quick, "Good morning, Mama," that always brightened my day. But now, the calls came less often. Sometimes he would say, "I'm busy," or "I'll call you later." And though I smiled and said, "Of course," my heart noticed every silence. I tried to tell myself it was natural. He was newly married. He had his own responsibilities now. It wasn't fair to expect him to remain the little boy who once held my hand. And yet, every time the phone stayed quiet, a part of me felt lonelier than before. Julia, too, began to change. In the beginning, she was warm, always offering tea when I visited, always asking about my health. But as weeks passed, her words became fewer, the smiles less frequent. If I stayed too long, I could see the impatience in her eyes. Though she never said anything harsh, it was in the way she stood near the door, waiting for me to leave, in the way her voice tightened when I asked too many questions. One afternoon, I decided to visit without calling ahead. I had baked Daniel's favorite sweetbread and wrapped it carefully. When I knocked on their door, Julia opened it, her face surprised. "Oh, Auntie," she said softly, "you didn't call." I smiled, holding out the bread. I wanted to surprise Daniel. She took the bread politely, but her eyes flickered with something I could not name. She said, "He's resting. He had a long day." I hesitated. "Just for a moment. May I see him?" She sighed, just barely, then opened the door. Daniel came out, his hair messy, his smile tired but genuine. "Mama," he said, hugging me, "what a surprise." For a few minutes, we talked. I gave him the bread, he thanked me, and I left. But as I walked down the street, I felt the heaviness in my chest. The warmth I once felt in his home was no longer there. I was a guest now, not a mother. Weeks turned into months. I tried to stay in my place, not to intrude, but no matter how careful I was, the wall between us seemed to grow. On Daniel's birthday, I prepared a small dinner at my home. I cooked all his favorite dishes, the spicy curry he loved, the rice pudding he always asked for. I decorated the table with candles, placed fresh flowers, and waited eagerly. When he arrived, Julia was with him. I greeted them warmly, hugging them both. But as we sat at the table, I noticed Julia barely touched her food. She smiled politely, but her fork moved slowly. I asked gently, "Is it too spicy?" No, she said quickly. "It's good." But I could see she wasn't comfortable. Daniel noticed too. He put his hand on hers and whispered something. I lowered my eyes, pretending not to hear. But inside, a small crack widened. After dinner, as they left, Julia hugged me and said, "Thank you, Auntie." Her words were kind, but her eyes seemed distant. That night, I sat alone at the table, staring at the empty plates. I thought about all the years I had spent cooking for Daniel, all the nights I stayed awake when he was sick, all the mornings I woke early to prepare his lunch. And now, the very food that once brought him joy
seemed to push him away. I reminded myself, change is natural. Marriage changes everything. But still, it hurt. Then came the family gatherings. During holidays, relatives would visit. We would sit together, eat, and share stories. But I noticed something new. Julia always chose to sit by her own family, while I found myself alone at the corner of the table. When I tried to join the conversation, they smiled politely, then turned back to each other. Once at a festival, I overheard someone say to Julia, "You are so lucky to have such a caring mother-in-law?" Julia smiled, but her reply stung me. She is kind, but sometimes she doesn't understand boundaries. Boundaries. The word echoed in my head. Had I crossed a line? Had I loved too much? Given too much? I began to question myself. Every visit, every call, every gift. Was I wrong to still hold on? Was I suffocating them with my love? One evening, Daniel called. His voice was gentle, but there was a hesitation I had never heard before. "Mama," he said, "Julia feels sometimes you visit without asking, and it makes her uncomfortable. She just needs some space." I was silent. My hands trembled as I held the phone. Space. After all the years of being his world, now I was being asked to step back? "I understand. I'm sorry." And that night, I cried quietly. Not loud sobs, but silent tears that soaked my pillow. From then on, I rarely visited. I waited for Daniel to call, but the calls grew fewer. When he did call, Julia's voice was often in the background, reminding him of something. Our conversations grew shorter, filled with pauses. Then came the wedding of Julia's cousin. The whole family was invited. I went, dressed carefully, my heart hopeful. Maybe today, I thought, I will feel like I belong again. But as I entered the hall, I noticed something. Julia's family was seated at the front, near the stage. Daniel sat beside them, smiling, laughing. I searched for a chair nearby, but Julia's aunt gently touched my arm. She said, "Perhaps you can sit over there," pointing to a row at the back. My cheeks burned. I nodded politely and sat quietly at the corner. From the distance, I watched my son surrounded by laughter, by family, by love, and yet I was not part of it. That night, I went home with an emptiness I could not describe. The final straw came on the day of Daniel's wedding, the story I began with. I had dreamed of that day for years. I had imagined sitting in the front row, watching him take his vows, smiling through my tears. Instead, I was asked to sit outside, not with anger, not with cruelty, but with a polite, practiced tone that cut deeper than any harsh word could. I sat alone in the hallway, listening to the music, the vows, the laughter. My heart felt like it was being pressed under a heavy stone. I whispered to myself, is this what it means to be a mother-in-law? To be loved once, then set aside? And yet, even in that pain, I smiled, because a mother's love does not demand. It only gives, even when it hurts. But I did not know that an hour later, everything would change.
I sat in the hallway, hands folded on my lap. The sound of music drifted through the closed doors, soft and cheerful, like a world I was no longer part of. Laughter floated in waves, the sound of glasses clinking, voices calling for the couple to smile for the camera. I pressed my palms together tightly, trying to hold myself steady. My body was there, sitting in that narrow chair, but my heart My heart was somewhere between the past and the present. I thought about the day I gave birth to Daniel. The pain, the sweat, the tears, and then the joy of hearing his first cry. I remembered how I had whispered to him, "You are my everything." And now, on his wedding day, I was sitting outside, as though my love counted for nothing. Minutes felt like hours. I looked at the small box in my bag, the family keepsake I had brought as a gift, a bracelet, old and simple, once worn by my mother, then passed to me. I had wanted to give it to Julia, a way of saying, "You are family now. This is my blessing for you." But I sat there, clutching it tightly, wondering if I would even get the chance. People walked past me. Some gave me sympathetic looks. Some avoided my eyes altogether. One older woman paused briefly, her lips pressed together, as if she wanted to say something, but then she walked on. Silence can sometimes wound more than words. I don't know how much time passed, but suddenly I heard hurried footsteps. The doors opened and Julia appeared. Her dress shimmered in the light, but her face was pale. Her eyes were wide, almost panicked, and her hands trembled as she held the edge of her gown. She looked at me for a long moment, and then, to my shock, she knelt down in front of me. "Mama?" Her voice cracked. Please come inside." I blinked, not sure if I had heard correctly. "Inside?" I whispered. Tears welled in her eyes. "Yes, I was wrong. I should have never allowed this. Everyone is asking where you are. They want to see you. Daniel, he's looking for you. Please, don't stay out here." For a moment, I could not speak. My throat was dry, my heart heavy. 100 emotions surged inside me. Hurt, relief, confusion, love. I wanted to ask her why. Why now? Why after leaving me out here? But instead, I placed my hand gently on hers. Her fingers were cold, shaking. I could see the sincerity in her eyes, the regret, and in that moment, my heart softened. I rose slowly from the chair. Julia held my arm as if she was afraid I might slip away again. Together, we walked back to the doors. When they opened, all eyes turned to me. The music softened. People whispered. My son stood at the front, his face filled with shock. And something else, relief. His shoulders dropped as though a heavy weight had been lifted. "Mama," he said, his voice breaking. He rushed forward, his arms outstretched, and for the first time that day, I felt like I belonged again. He hugged me tightly, so tightly I could barely breathe. "I'm so sorry," he whispered into my ear. "I didn't know. I thought you were with the family. Please forgive me." I closed my eyes, holding him close. "Shh," I whispered, stroking his back. "It's all right. I'm here now." The guests clapped softly. Some even wiped their eyes. It was as though the entire room had been holding its breath, and now it exhaled together. Julia stood beside us, her hands clasped. She looked at me with tears streaming down her cheeks. "I was wrong," she said openly, her voice trembling. I thought I was protecting boundaries, but instead I hurt the very person who gave me the man I love. I'm sorry, Mama." I looked at her sincerity, at the humility it must have taken to say those words in front of everyone. Slowly, I opened my bag and took out the small box. "This was for you," I said softly, handing it to her. She opened it, and when she saw the bracelet, her lips quivered.
She looked up at me with wide eyes. "It belonged to my mother," I explained. "She gave it to me on my wedding day. And now I give it to you, not as a daughter-in-law, but as my daughter." Julia's tears fell freely as she embraced me, and in that moment, the wall between us finally crumbled. The rest of the ceremony moved forward, but something had changed. I was no longer on the outside. I sat beside my son, watching him take his vows, my hand resting on Julia's. The music sounded sweeter, the laughter warmer. I felt seen, valued, loved again. Later, as the guests ate and danced, Daniel sat beside me quietly. He took my hand, just as he did when he was a little boy. "Mama," he said, his voice low, "I promise you, no one will ever make you feel like you don't belong. You are my family. Always." I smiled, tears filling my eyes once more. "That's all I ever wanted," I whispered. That night, when I finally returned home, I sat by the window again. The stars shone above, and for the first time in a long time, my heart felt light. I had been broken, yes, but I had also been healed. Life has a way of testing love, stretching it thin until it almost breaks, but sometimes, just sometimes, it comes back stronger than before. The days after the wedding felt different. Something had shifted, not only in the way my son looked at me, but in the way Julia treated me too. There was a gentleness in her now, a care that had not been there before. It was as though the moment she saw me sitting outside the hall, alone and forgotten, she finally understood the depth of a mother's love. The morning after the wedding, I woke up to a message on my phone. It was from Julia. Just 3 words. "Good morning, Mama." I stared at the screen, my eyes filling with tears. It was the first time she had called me that, Mama. Not Auntie, not Mrs., but Mama. A simple word, but to me it was everything. Later that day, Daniel called. His voice was warm, lighter than it had been in months. "We're coming over tonight," he said. "No excuses. Julia wants to help you cook." When they arrived, Julia walked straight into the kitchen, rolled up her sleeves and asked, "Teach me your rice pudding, Mama. Daniel always says no one makes it like you." I smiled, handing her the spoon. Together we stirred the milk, added sugar, and laughed when the pot bubbled over. For the first time, I saw her not as someone taking my son away, but as someone joining the family. That night, when we sat down to eat, I noticed Daniel watching us. His eyes were soft, his lips curved in a quiet smile. He didn't say anything, but I knew what he was thinking. This is how it should be. Weeks turned into months, and little by little, things changed. Julia began to call me often, sometimes to ask for recipes, sometimes just to talk. "Mama, what do you do when you can't sleep?" she once asked. I told her how I used to drink warm milk and sit by the window, looking at the stars. The next evening, she sent me a photo, a cup of milk in her hand, the night sky in the background. She wrote, "I tried it. It worked." Daniel, too, made more effort. He visited on weekends, bringing small gifts, fixing things around the house. One Sunday, he came with a bag of soil and flower pots. He said, "Mama, you always wanted a garden. Let's start one together." And so we did. Side by side, we planted roses, jasmine, and tulips. As the weeks passed, tiny green shoots appeared, and I thought to myself, maybe love is like this. It looks dead for a while, but if you water it, if you give it care, it grows again. There were still moments of tension, of course. Once,
Julia and I disagreed about how to celebrate a holiday. She wanted to go to her family's home, and I had hoped they would come to mine. For a moment, the old ache returned. But then, instead of holding it in, I told her gently, I just miss him on days like these. It feels empty without him. She was quiet for a while. Then she nodded. I understand, Mama. We'll split the day. Morning with your parents, evening with you. It was a small compromise, but it meant the world to me. Slowly, I began to see Julia not as a rival, but as a young woman trying to balance two worlds. She was learning too, learning how to be a wife, how to share her husband with another woman who had loved him first. That is never easy. One evening, Julia sat beside me, her voice hesitant. Mama, can I tell you something? I said, Of course. I was jealous of you, she admitted, her eyes lowered. Daniel loves you so much. Sometimes I felt I could never have that place in his heart. I thought if I kept you at a distance, maybe he would turn more toward me. But it only made things worse. I'm sorry. Her honesty surprised me. I reached for her hand, squeezing it gently. Love isn't a competition, I said softly. A son's love for his mother doesn't take away from his love for his wife. He has two places in his heart, one for you, one for me. Different, but both important. She looked at me then, her eyes shimmering. Thank you, she whispered. From that day, our bond deepened. Not perfect, not without flaws, but real. She began to share her worries with me, about work, about the future, about children, and I listened not as an outsider, but as a mother. When she discovered she was expecting, she was the first to call me. Mama, she cried over the phone, her voice full of trembling joy, we're going to have a baby. I closed my eyes, tears slipping down my cheeks. A grandchild, another life, another chance to pour love into the world. During her pregnancy, I tried to be there without being overbearing. I cooked meals for her, walked with her, prayed for her. When the baby kicked for the first time, she grabbed my hand and placed it on her belly. Feel this, Mama? She laughed through tears. And I felt it, a tiny flutter, a miracle. When the baby was born, I held him in my arms, my heart swelling with love so deep it almost hurt. Daniel looked at me, his eyes full of pride. Mama, you've given me everything. Now, help me give everything to him. And so, life found its rhythm again. Looking back, I realized that pain often comes before healing, that sometimes love needs to be tested, stretched, even broken before it can grow stronger. I learned that being a mother-in-law is not about holding on tightly, but about letting go gently, about making space for new love, even when it feels like there is no room left. And most of all, I learned that forgiveness is not a gift we give others. It is a gift we give ourselves. The day they asked me to sit outside the wedding hall will always remain in my memory, but so will the moment they begged me to come back in. Both are part of my story. Both taught me something I will never forget.
Sometimes, late at night, I sit by my window with a cup of tea in my hands and think about that day at the wedding, the day I was asked to sit outside. For a long time, that memory felt like a wound. I could still feel the sting of those words, still hear the sound of the door closing behind me. It made me wonder if all the years of sacrifice, all the nights I stayed awake by my son's bedside, all the meals I skipped so he could eat more, had they been forgotten in a single moment? But life has a way of softening even the sharpest memories. Because when I think of it now, I don't stop at the pain. I remember what came after, Julia's trembling voice, Daniel's arms around me,
The tears, the bracelet, the forgiveness. I remember the lesson hidden in that moment, that sometimes love goes quiet before it speaks again. Sometimes it pushes away before it learns how to hold on. I realize now that motherhood does not end on the day your child marries. It only changes shape. A mother is not replaced by a wife. She simply moves to a different seat in her child's life. Not the front row anymore, perhaps, but never outside the door. It took me time to understand this. It took hurt, silence, and healing. But now, when I see Daniel with his family, when I watch Julia laugh with their child in her arms, I don't feel pushed away. I feel grateful. Grateful that my son is loved. Grateful that my family has grown. Grateful that I am still part of their story. Forgiveness was the bridge that carried me from loneliness to belonging. And humility, Julia's humility to admit her mistake, my humility to let go of my pride, that was what saved us. If you are listening to me now, perhaps you are a mother who feels forgotten. Perhaps you have given your whole heart only to feel there is no place for you anymore. I want to tell you this: do not let bitterness take root. Yes, it hurts when love changes, but love is not gone. It is only finding a new way to exist. And if you are a son or a daughter-in-law listening to this, remember that a mother's love is not something to fear or compete with. It is the foundation that made your family possible. Honor it, respect it, give it a place even if small. Because one day, years from now, when you are older, you will understand. You will look back and see that the quiet hands who raised you, the gentle voice that prayed for you, the tears that fell for you, they were not small things. They were everything. So when I think of my son's wedding now, I no longer see only the moment I was left outside. I see the moment I was welcomed back in. Both moments belong to me. Both moments shaped me. And as I close my eyes tonight, I whisper the same prayer I whispered when Daniel was born. May love always guide him. May forgiveness always keep us together. And may I always find the strength to smile, even when my heart aches. Because in the end, love is not about where you sit at the table. Love is about knowing you still belong.
Subscribe my channel for more interesting videos like this.